Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia McClellan Terrell. I write under the pen name PM Terrell, and I am so excited today because I have my good friend Glenna Mageau here, and she is a multi-award winning author, speaker, and coach. I'm a huge fan of her page-turning suspense thrillers, and she also writes heart-connecting nonfiction. Her passion is to empower and inspire women, and she's definitely done that with me, to overcome the hurdles that hold them back and for them to discover and explore their gifts and talents. Her goal is to help women thrive going into old age, but I have to say that you don't have to be old to thrive under her care. Knowing that they matter, they feel loved, connected, and living in the true essence of who they are. I'm very excited about Glenna's latest book. It's called Do You Know Your Mom's Story? 365 Questions You Need to Ask Her. It's a way to get conversations started between mothers and their children. It's a way to get your mom to share her journey and her life, in particular, elderly mothers. But I do have to tell you that I even gave this book to my daughter-in-law so that she can fill it out for my granddaughter, so you don't have to have an elderly mother to use this. Glenna's goal, however, is that when we go into our old age, we should feel loved, connected, and know that our lives mattered. Understanding your mom's journey will help you to understand her in a whole new light. Welcome, Glenna. I'm so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you. I'm truly honored to be doing this with you, Trish, because you're one of my favorite authors. So I'm very honored.
Thank you. I always feel like we're sitting over a cup of coffee when we're talking.
I know. One of these days we'll bridge that distance. That's so cool.
Yes, we will. Here I am in North Carolina, and you're in British Columbia?
Yeah. I'm out at Vancouver Island. So little distance between us, but that's the cool thing of today, right? Love it.
Well, I have to ask you, what inspired you to write the book, Do You Know Your Mom's Story?
You know, it really came about, there was a number of things that sort of brought this about. The first one being my mom passed away a few years ago. Now, I did have the opportunity and I made the effort to sit down with her and really get to know her and understand her, because we had a good relationship, but, you know, there was some frustration and back and forth, and it's like, oh, Mom, you know. And so I spent some time with her, really getting to know her and understanding her life, and I am so thrilled that I did that. But for information, I have it kind of scattered all over the place. You know, I have a bit here and a bit there, and, you know, I'm slowly been putting it together, but it just really dawned on me it would be nice to have some place to put it. Another thing that really inspired this is I have been interviewing for the last number of years anyway, women who are over the age of, I guess you'd say about 80 now, who back in their day stepped outside the norm. So they worked or got educated. And oh my God, I've met some amazing women. But the one thing that came through pretty clear to me was some of their information their families didn't know about. And I found that extremely sad. They'd never shared it. Another was that many of them felt like their lives, they really hadn't done a whole lot. And I'm thinking, wow, not only did you do something most women weren't in that day, you've really done some amazing things, but all women have done. I truly believe every woman should be telling her story, whether she's a mom or not, because I truly think women's journeys are absolutely amazing. But too often we look at it from our perspective, it's like, oh yeah, but it's not like, you know, so-and-so has done. My name isn't in lights kind of thing. And it's like, oh man, so that was another thing. And there was kind of a third reason, and that really was because I know also with older women, there tends to be more of a rift with their children. And there's kind of a distance. And like I said, going into old age, we should know that our lives mattered. And too many of the seniors don't, and especially women. Women, I find, seem to be more susceptible to not feeling like their lives have really mattered. So I wanted something that would help to bridge that gap, to give children a way to talk to their mom, how to ask those questions. Because one thing that I hear from the elderly women is, my kids never ask about my life. And then I hear from the adult children, Mom never shares anything. So there's a big rift in how they're asking and how it's being heard. So it's, yeah. Anyway, so those were the main reasons. I mean, there's a ton really, but it just, it's something I'm really passionate about. I just, yeah. Anyway, I find elderly women so amazing and so inspiring. And I just wanted to make sure their stories aren't lost.
You know, it's obvious the inspiration that you found from the women that you've spoken to. The questions in your book, 365 questions to ask. It's so comprehensive. What was it like putting together those particular questions?
You know, it's so funny because since I've published it, honest to God, I've come up with probably another 1,000. It's like, oh, I could have asked, you know, but I mean, it really was like, okay, just stop with the questions because it's about getting them started. I mean, there's going to be so many more come up for people, but you know, it was fascinating because I asked a number of people, what is something you'd like to know about your mom? What is something, and especially a number of people were like, I think actually the ones that I got the most from were people who've lost their moms already that really said, oh my God, I wish I'd asked her this. I wish I'd asked her that. And you know, it's an awful day when you realize you can't ask her anymore. Like she's just not there. And sometimes it's because of dementia, but sometimes she's physically not there to ask. And it's like, oh man. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked with that have lost their moms years ago and all that history's gone. In fact, a lot of their family history's gone. So it was incredibly eye-opening, but fascinating to come up with these questions. And yeah, it was quite a journey to do it. But like I said, I've come up with so many more. It's like, oh my God. But again, people are going to come up with their own because it's going to be specific to their situation, right? I just try to give a ton of topics and a ton of questions to get it started. And then, you know, hopefully it'll fly.
You know, I hadn't thought about the tie-in to women who have dementia. And listening to you just now, it reminds me of the book and the movie, The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks.
Yeah.
When you were putting together these questions, were there particular ones that spoke to you or were there favorites?
I think there were a few, and it really goes back to my mom's childhood, right? And just knowing what are the things that you love to do and what was it like growing up, you know, in your house? What were the things you did as a family back then? You know, what was something that you did that you never told your mom and dad? Those kind of things, right? That, but just the things that she loved to do, you know, as a childhood to teen, and in her younger days, right? The days that I definitely would have had no connection to. I just found it fascinating, the stories and the way that, you know, everything they did from how do you get to school to phoning somebody to, you know, all the transportation. I mean, all of those things so different from today. And I just find that incredibly fascinating stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, you know, because in addition to learning about your mother, you really learn about a particular era and a particular place. And I think back to my mother growing up with no phone. You know, I think she was a teenager before she rode in her first car, and then it was a rumble seat.
Oh, wow.
Was
Cool.
there something about, like, where did your mom grow up? In Canada?
Yep, she grew up in southern Alberta on a farm. She was a farm kid, and she was one of two children. And so she, growing up on a farm, and she had a horse, her own horse, and so she rode a lot. She rode a bike a lot, you know, those kind of things. But going to school, I mean, she had to move away from home and board elsewhere because they lived about 15 miles, which nowadays is like 15 miles. But back then, 15 miles was a whole long ways to get to on horse. And, you know, in a day, you couldn't go there and come back kind of thing. So, and spend the whole day at school. So she ended up having to board away from home for, you know, a number of years just to go to school. So yeah, a lot of differences in that time. And you're right, it's about learning about a whole other era. One of the things that's really fascinating with this is with the book coming out, I've been going out and doing talks at senior residences and just talking with them about their lives and the differences and that they've lived through really the most dynamic change in history of any generation. I mean, and so I started talking with them, and oh my God, it was so amazing because, you know, I'm talking about phones, and I took actually an old phone, just part of one, and says, do you remember this kind of phone and the big phones on the wall and having to walk to the store, the neighbors, and then the party lines. And oh my God, they just, you're like, oh yeah, and you're listening in on the neighbor and you're not supposed to be, right? Or, you know, and then we talked about walking, and I said, you know, walking in your day, very different to today. Today was like, oh yeah, well, I got to walk a few blocks. In your day, it was like, I got to walk 5 to 10 miles. And then I've got to turn around and walk 5 to 10 miles back. Right. So yeah, it's just been so amazing, the conversations and things that have come back. But if you really want to get to know your mom, learn about that era and then ask her questions, because you'll get so much more information. Because even with doing these talks that I was doing, and I'm talking a lot about even just something simple like making apple pie today versus making apple pie back in their day, right? Oh my God, I got so much reaction from it. But the cool thing is that many of the residents started sharing some of their stories. And the interesting thing was many of the staff went, I didn't know that about her. I didn't know that about him. Because even there was gentlemen there as well, right? So they really started sharing some of their stories, and the staff were like, wow, you know, and they've worked with them for years, right? So if you can really relate to the era that they know, and that's when they're a kid, that's the era you got to know. Totally brings out that other side of them, and they share. Like, I learned so many stories. Oh, I love it, love it, love it. It was beautiful.
Yeah, I hope that you tape some of those sometime. I wish that you lived closer, because we have several facilities near here that, you know, I would imagine that every story is just such an eye opener. Was there a favorite or two that you were told?
Well, I think actually the favorite, only because this woman comes up to me actually after the talk, and she goes, so your name's Glenna? And I said, yeah. And she goes, so's mine. And I said, really? Like, really? She says, yeah. And I said, well, to be honest, you're the 4th Glenna I've ever met in my life. And she goes, well, that's funny, because you're the 4th Glenna I've ever met in my life. And she's 90. So it's not a common name. I haven't met I've heard of, you know, Glennas being around, but you just don't meet them. So that was very cool. And she told me a lot about her life and her journey. And so that was really cool, because it was such a connection. And actually the really cool thing was, she said, I said, how did you get your name? I said, I'm always fascinated because, you know, we don't hear it. And she says, I was named after a golfer. And I'm thinking, a golfer back in, you know, the early 1900s? I'd never heard of it. So I Googled it. Sure enough, there was a Glenna who was a golfer. So I printed it off, and actually I'm going to drop it off for her today to say, I don't know if you realize, but here's the information on the lady that you're probably named after. It's the only Glenna I could find that was a golfer. And she was a famous golfer back in the 20s. So I just thought, oh, isn't that cool? Like, wow. So I think that was my favorite, just because of, but a gentleman came up to me after, and he says, I just wanted to talk to you about the apple pies. And I says, oh. I said, did you used to make them, or do you make them now? And he says, no, don't make them now. He says, but he says, back in, I think it was the 50s, he said there was about a dozen of us. And he said, we cleaned out this orchard of apples, and we made 84 apple pies. And he said, we were so sick of apple pies. And he said, but it was, you know, it was like a dozen of us. And he said, so everybody, it's like, okay, no, take more home, take more home. I said, how cool is that? And he said, yeah. He said, that was our record. He said, we had made, you know, like 60 other years, but he said that year, and he said, I've got a picture someplace. I said, well, if you find it, I'd love to see it. But anyway, it was just so cool, right? He was just like, apple pies. Because I was saying that, I said, back in your day, like today we go to the store and we make one pie, right? We buy all the stuff and we do it. And I said, back in your day, it's like, okay, they're not ripe on the tree and there's none left in the freezer. So we're not making an apple pie till the fall. And then when it was fall, you'd go pick all of the apples and then make 10 to 20 pies at a time, right? And then freeze a bunch of them. So yeah, that's why he came up after and said, we made 84 in one day. And I thought, oh, I can't even imagine feeling.
Either.
I said, God, I couldn't even do that today. So kudos to you. And we have a lot more easier stuff today than you guys did. But anyway.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
I don't know if I could survive back then.
No, they worked hard. And that was one of the things I talked about their day. I says, I bet your day started like this. And oh my God, they're just sitting there going, oh yeah. And I says, and I can tell from your expression, you're all pretty happy that you're not having to do that anymore. And they're all like, yeah. So it was honestly, it was amazing. I just loved it. They're so inspiring, the individuals that live there. We often forget that our seniors have had incredible lives and incredible knowledge. And they're funny. Oh my God, they're funny. But it's when it's our mom, we tend to get a little bit, there's just that little bit of stress between us because we hold the past. And anyway, so that's why I'm hoping that this will help to bridge that gap, because I just, honestly, and I keep saying, have you told your children that story? Well, and it's like, oh, you need to tell them. In some cases they did. Someone said, oh yeah, I've told them everything, even the bad stuff. But lots haven't. It's like, oh yeah, one day, and it just breaks my heart when I hear that there's obviously a disconnect, and it's like, well, I don't know if they want to hear it, kind of thing. Yeah, they do. Believe me, they do. They need to hear this. So I'm hoping actually in future to do more talks that also include families and parents together. So I'm hoping actually to do, I kind of had thought I wanted to do them first and then, but I think I want to do the seniors talks first and then do family ones, so that the seniors, I think one will get to know me more and be open with talking with me, because they were really open and it was amazing. Actually, the staff were even amazed. They were like, holy cow, we got a full house here. Like, says, we never get this many out to, a talk kind of thing. And it was like, the place was packed. So, it was just, yeah, I loved it. I love seeing them come to life and the smile and they're like, oh my God. And yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, I would imagine that not too many people are asking them about their lives. And that's sad.
No. Yeah. And the unfortunate thing is too often people say, so tell me about your life. And it's like, you ask me that, I'd be going, well, it's about engaging with a topic. It's just so much easier. It's like, especially the cell phone. I started out with a cell phone and I held it up and I said, normally when I start my talk, I ask everybody to shut off their cell phones, but I'm pretty sure that's not a problem here. Well, they started laughing. And I said, who has a cell phone? And I think there was 3 or 4. And I was like, hey, that's really cool. But, they got a kick out of that. And then they brought out this old phone. And I said, wow, look at the difference. And not only is this a cell phone, it's a newspaper, it's an encyclopedia, it's music, So, yeah, it's about finding something and relating it back to what they knew and say, like, what would you have done if you'd have had this back in your day, kind of thing, right? Or just, yeah, honestly, I highly encourage people, just go read some history about what they really had back then and what it was really like. And then, broach that subject, but also share some of you. And I think that's sometimes too, where some of the problem comes in, is because it's so much about, okay, so what did you do? Okay, how did you do that? Where, and it's not like, oh, wow, I would do this. This is how I do it nowadays. Like, so I can imagine having to do that, right? So it gives them that relation that you understand the difference and what they really went through, because very different times for our moms. I mean, we're talking a lot of oppression for women. The expectations were, you look after everyone, you get married, you have kids, you look after everyone. That was it. And that's a lot of pressure on women. And so they became like, 20 roles, like the peacekeeper, the nurturer, the nurse, everything. And they didn't have anyone to talk to. And anyway, it's obviously something I'm very passionate about.
Yes, and I love that. I mean, I could talk to you all day about this. You bring up so many things, as you're talking. Like, I heard recently that the average iPhone or smartphone has more capability than the computers did at NASA that sent men to the moon.
That's scary.
It's just, I know, it's amazing that, in the palm of our hand, we have more technology in such a short period of time. And, there were so many women that worked at NASA in the background that you never heard about. In giving these talks, have you heard about particular occupations that women have brought up?
Not so much in doing this, but in the interviews that I have been doing with other women, oh my God, I have met some amazing women. I mean, a lot of women went into teaching, nursing, secretary kind of thing, because that was sort of the expectation. But I've met women who've gone into politics. I met one woman who was the first mayor of the city that she was in, first woman in politics in that city, and I think in quite a few areas back in the late 60s, I think it was. Um, so really, that's not that long ago. Another woman, she worked for the United Nations, and there was many places. She was the only woman, and she was quite high ranking. She was right up there. Oh my God, she's a brilliant, brilliant woman, and just incredible. She's done some incredible things in her life. So yeah, I've met women who have, stepped into a lot of different jobs and roles, and that, and yeah, and again, back to the one thing that keeps popping in my head is one time I had gone to a residence, and I had, specifically asked to talk with women who had stepped outside the norm. And it's just because they fascinated me. What got them that oomph to really do it? Like, where did they find the power to do it? Because like 1 in 10 women, if that many, I think in the later stages, it was 1 in 10, 1 in 20 way back, right? So it wasn't very many women stepping outside that norm. And of course, during the war, that shifted things a bit. But this one time I had gone to do this talk, and there was a number of women sitting around the table, and I was just sort of casually talking. And one woman piped up and she goes, "Oh, I only have grade 8, so you don't want to talk to me." She says, "My life is nothing." And I was like, oh my God, that was so not my intent. But I hear that a lot. And I think grade 8 actually is a pretty common grade level for a lot of the women to have gone to. And it was never about, making anybody feel like, but it just really struck me from that point. I really started paying attention. That's when I really realized, this was many years ago, that many women, it doesn't matter whether they've been educated, uneducated, worked or not worked, many feel like their lives just haven't been that important, right? And again, that comes back to the disconnect with family, with community. You're old and it's like, okay, well, let's put them in this home. Let's move them out of the, and we forget the value of what they know and what they've done. And I just find that incredibly sad.
One of the chapters, or probably several of the chapters, actually dealt with your mother's hopes and dreams, what her inspirations were or aspirations were. Did you talk to anyone who had talked about what they had wanted to do and either reach that goal, or there's like sidetracked?
Actually, I talked with a number, and again, the sad truth is that there are many who didn't, because again, it was tough back in those days to step outside the norm. So a lot of women, even those who did step outside the norm, a lot of them came back to dropping their dreams to become a mom, and some of that is just because it would have been extremely difficult working, looking after kids, and because everything was so manual back then, right? Like a whole lot more work and difficult to get around, right? You couldn't afford 2-3 cars or whatever, that we have now. But some of them did it. Some of them did that and did incredibly well. But a lot of women have, there were things they wanted. One woman, she just wanted an education. She lived in rural Alberta, way out in rural Alberta, quite a ways from anywhere. And so she started taking grade 1 by correspondence. And she didn't know much about either her parents' history. And so anyway, she started taking grade 1, and she was asking her parents for help. And basically she quit school by grade 2 because
oh my goodness,
they didn't help her. So, she said, now looking back, she says, I'm pretty sure they were uneducated, but she says, I have no idea. So for her, it was just an education. So that bothered her whole life because she never learned to read or write. And man, she did some cool things. I'm thinking, holy cow, to go your whole life without reading and writing, and you have done all of this kind of stuff. And yet I think that's pretty common. I really do. I think there's quite a few. And for her, embarrassing. Incredibly embarrassing when everything is about you got to have some education. She says, I had none. I had none. So
Can
for
you
her, it was
share
just
with us
simply,
what she ended up doing?
pardon me?
Can you share with us what she ended
Well,
up?
she ended up actually working. She became a cook actually, and worked for a number of different crews, a lot on the rail line actually. So she became
Oh,
a cook on the rail line. And she was a hunter too. Oh my God, she lived a fascinating life. She went and lived up on the mountain for a year by herself and
wow.
lived off the land. So she just did some cool stuff and walking. Oh my God, that woman, like 40 miles a day was nothing,
Wow.
nothing. Like that was probably an average day. Yeah. So she did some really, cool things. And then later on in her life, she got involved in some different committees and, I can't even think which ones right now. There's a couple come to mind, and I can't remember if those are ones she did or another woman did. But anyway, I know she got involved with some committees, and she got involved in some stuff. And I just think, wow, kudos, lady. But she says, yeah, she says I hid it most of my life that I couldn't read or write.
Did she ever learn how to read, or to this day?
No, when I met her, actually, we spent actually a little bit of time because I said, I'd be more than happy to teach you some really, really basics. I mean, the fact that she even told me was like, wow. But see, that's the other thing. I have been told so much stuff. Like she says, my kids don't know that I can't read or write.
Really?
Yeah, her kids did not know. So how she hid that, especially with school, I'm thinking that
Yeah.
was, so she figured out a way. I'm assuming her husband, I never really did ask her if her husband could read or write, but somehow she managed to deal with stuff. But yeah, no, she didn't know how. And I'm not sure if she really shared with anybody before me, to be perfectly honest with you. She just said, I hid it most of my life.
Wow.
And she did share that her family didn't know, that her kids did not know she could not read or write, still to that day. And she was in her late 80s at that point.
Wow.
So we had a great conversation with it. And I think she actually was much more comfortable after, because, I said, that's never something to be embarrassed about. Like, I know that there's a lot of stress on that. And I said, and I said to her, I says, I hope, if there's any way I could encourage you, it would be, because I know this is something, because, it was obviously something she was extremely passionate about. I says, man, if there's any way I can support you in learning how to read and write, I says 100%. But she did a little bit, and I said, you can start with these kind of books, but yeah, she was, at that age. But so I don't know. Actually, I lost touch with her a couple of years ago because I moved, unfortunately. So I don't know if she ever pursued more. She did a little bit, like I said, but.
Yeah, I know that reading and writing is such a passion for you, and you started the women rights movement. Tell
Yeah.
me about that.
Well, again, the women rights movement, it's about helping women find their voice through writing, because writing just, to me, connects us to so many things, and just helps us understand the world so different. But again, it comes back to, we all have incredible stories to tell, and how you choose to tell it, whether it's through fiction or nonfiction. Because even in fiction, even though we go, way off, there's still part of us in there, that I just think that through allowing words to flow through you and to write, it just opens us to so much more possibility, gives us, I think it also gives us a lot of more self-worth, and connection. I think there's a huge connection when we do that. We just feel more connected to everything. There's a lot more clarity as well. And it's also a way to escape. Like, really, it's just a way to escape everything, right? You can create whatever world you want. You can write about whatever world. You can read and get lost in another world. So yeah, reading and writing, I think, are the two best gifts we've ever been given.
Well, talking about escaping, I absolutely love your series, the Caspian Wine series. And please tell our listeners something about that.
Well, the Caspian Wine series, it's based in Canada, actually. So it's different places in Canada, but really the story, actually the very first one in the book is called Captured Lies. And it really just started with, some simple things that happened in my life is where the idea came from. But it's really about this woman who is right around 30 years old, and her mom, or who she thought was her mom, passed away. And then she discovers her whole life's been a lie, and that woman who raised her is not her mom. And so she has to untangle that whole past. So the 3 books are really 3 sort of individual stories, although 2 and 3 are much more connected, which you don't find out until you read 3. But the connection really between them all is this Caspian wine. And also there's a private investigative service that is kind of throughout the 3 that helps with untangling some of the story and the things within there. So yeah, and I love writing suspense thrillers. That's my escapism, into a whole other world.
Yeah, you have me on the edge of my seat. Every time I start reading one of your books, I know I can't do anything else because I won't want to put this book down. And I was in Canada one time, and that was probably in the mid to early 70s.
Oh, wow.
And it was just up into Quebec.
Beautiful.
Just for a short, few days time. And reading your books, it takes me on this journey that literally crisscrosses the whole country, as they're entangled in these, suspense murders and secrets and lies and all of these different things, the bad guys after them. I absolutely love it. And I've been eagerly awaiting your next book in the series. Are you working on one?
It's funny. I did start actually a 4th book in that series, but as I was writing it, and I'm probably about 20,000 words in, and I thought, one of the things that when I started that series, I had never planned on writing a series. I mean, I was never going to write a series, period, because they're a lot of work. And I just was assuming that from reading. I love reading series, but I thought I'm never doing it. But of course, never say never. So I wrote the series, but I wanted each story to be kind of a standalone. As it turns out, like I said, 2 and 3, really you should read 2 before 3, and 1, it just connects the people. But so when I started book 4 in the series, I just realized that it was getting complicated and more. I mean, my books are complicated as it is. They're complex, I guess I should say. And I thought, you know what, it's too much. So I'm not sure that I'm going to continue that series. I think that the one that I started, I'm going to try and just flip it to an individual story, because it became about too many people in there. And I thought, no, this is just too much. I mean, if people have read the past, they will like it. And I thought, really, I like where the series kind of ended. I absolutely could keep it going for a long time, but I really kind of like where it ended. And so I thought, I think I will, at this point anyway, leave it at that. So at this point, there won't be any more in that series, but I do have a couple other standalone, and so I think this one will become a standalone as well. So
are you working on anything other than the fiction right now?
Well, I always say no, but I always, honestly, I probably have 3 or 4 books that I'm writing at a time. People always go, "What? How do you do that?" Well, don't ask me. But really right now, I'm not doing a whole lot of writing, just because Do You Know Your Mom's Story, just came out. And so I'm doing a lot with promoting it. And like I said, setting up a lot of talks. So that's taking up, a lot of time and energy right now. So so I do have a few books that I'm sort of working on, but it's sort of doing a bit and then it's like back off for a while. And I have a few other projects that I'm working on right now that, kind of taking me away from the writing, but it's all good. It'll come back.
Well, now I have to ask you, are you going through your own book with your daughter and sharing stories with her?
Yeah, actually, with both my kids, I gave them both a copy. And I wrote in the front of it, I wrote them, just messages about how proud I am of them. And then in the back of the book, actually, I took several of the pages and I wrote stories my favorite stories of them growing up to now. So they were both like really, really touched, by that. I have incredible kids. So yeah, they've both been incredibly busy. So it's been like, yeah, there's sort of a question here, a question there kind of thing. But yeah, they're both very keen on doing more of that. So it's just been kind of crazy busy, but.
Now, if any of our readers or listeners want to know more information, where can they go to find out more?
All right, GlennaMageau.com. So that's GlennaMageau.com is probably the best place to find out all information about all my books. But they're available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of that. The Do You Know Your Mom story right now is just available on Amazon, and then on Vancouver Island, where I live locally, there's a number of places that carry it, and I will be expanding that distribution in the next month or so. So it'll be able to be available pretty much in any bookstore or library or, yeah. So just a matter of going in and asking, say, hey, can you get this? So probably in about the next month. Yeah. So.
Well, I absolutely love it. So I hope that it goes worldwide. I ordered my copies from Amazon, and I bought one for each of my sisters and my daughter-in-law and my stepmother. My own mother passed away years ago, and I would have loved to have gotten her stories. She told us a few over the years, but they were never written down. And so I look at this as not only learning about your own mother, but also about the era that she lived in, and how I write historical books that have my ancestors. I would have done anything to have gotten some information written down by one of my ancestors. That would have just been like finding a gold mine.
No kidding, hey.
I love the book, and thank you so much for writing it.
Aw, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
Just have the talk with mom, get the conversation started. And that also goes for your dad, with your parents, get to know their stories, like really to understand them and get to know them. But really your mom, that was sort of the focus of the book, but it's just so important to her. Honestly, you have no idea, even though she may come across, yeah, there's nothing. And believe me, I know they can do that. It will mean a lot to her. And like I said, if you can be indirect, the better off you're going to be, rather than, okay, so tell me about, riding a horse, or tell me about when you were a kid. If you can relate it to situations or things, you'll get a whole lot more out of them. And also sharing some of your stuff. Doesn't mean you have to give all your personal stuff, because, I get that too. But just, how you can relate to it, and the difference, and they absolutely will love it. But definitely start having the talk and documenting it, because it's really a tough day. The day you realize you can't ask your mom anymore, how did you make this? Or mom, when did you do that? Or mom, how did you? And those other ones, like, who was that again? Right? Yeah, that's a very tough day and a very sad day. So I highly recommend make sure you have the talk with mom.
Well, I love the way that you've made the talk so easy, by laying out all the questions and the subjects the way that you have. And for our listeners, the name again of the book is Do You Know Your Mom's Story? 365 questions you need to ask her.
Yes.
And Glenna Mageau, thank you so much. Thank you. I should have had a copy here to hold up, but I gave them all away.
It didn't even dawn on me. I was just like, oh, wait a minute, I have it right here. Funny.
And Glenna Mageau, thank you so much for joining us. And your website again is glennamageau.com. And I'm going to sign off now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Patricia.